Good evening, and welcome to Temple Israel. And thank you all for coming tonight. I'm Art Krakauer, a member of this congregation. The first order of business is to make sure everybody knows where the bathrooms are, and to please ask everyone to turn down your cell phone if you haven't done so already. Bathrooms are through the doorway that you came in, and then around to the right. As we learned last week, the story of anti-Semitism goes back a long time. Today we see anti-Semitism on the college campuses. It raises its ugly head in politics. We hear of incidents in the news. Example are Colleyville in Texas and the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. We can go to the FBI website and view statistics. Jews are targeted in more than 50% of the religious hate crimes in this country, and that has been true for years. At Temple Israel, as in most Jewish congregations in this country, there are armed police here when we gather. Some of our congregants want more protection. They still do not feel safe. So tonight, we will continue our conversation about anti-Semitism, and in a minute, I will ask the Reverend Dr. Tom Brody to introduce the program. But before I do that, I would like to read the lyrics of a social action song that was written for the 2017 Biennial Convention of the Reformed Jewish Movement. Darkness cannot drive out the darkness. Only light can drive the darkness away. Hate cannot drive out the hatred. Only love can bring the dawning of the day. There's a time when peace will be upon us, a time for which our prophets await. But the time to embrace one another is here and today. We can't turn our backs on work that lies before us, and we may not live to see Fulfillment Day. We can't wait for someone else to write the chorus. Only we can say the words we're meant to say. There's a time when peace will be upon us, a time for which our prophets await, but the time to embrace one another is here and today. The blackest night is pierced by a single candle. Silence is erased by just one voice. So in this time of ignorance and anger, let us come together and rejoice. There's a time when peace will be upon us, a time for which our prophets await, but the time to embrace one another is here and today. Dr. Bodie is somewhere here. There we are. Okay.
Good evening. I'm Tom Bodie, and I'm with Akron Area Interfaith Council and the chair of our Spiritual Life Committee. We'd like to thank you first for coming this evening. This is a great turnout, and so we're very happy. And how do you almost say more than what Art just did? I mean, I wrote down, I wrote Kyrie Irving to, and Jews, Hebrews to Negroes, Kanye West and Tucker Carlson, David DePape and the rantings on his blog, Elon Musk and the new Twitter, and it sounds to me like I've just said a year's worth of news, when instead what I've said is only the headlines on page 1 of the Anti-Defamation League's webpage for today, November 3rd. This year began with Colleyville, and it's so hard to believe that was January. It's still not been even a year from there. For all the anti-Jewish hate, from threats to personal safety to bomb threats, from schools attacked to synagogues attacked, in a year that is building to way outstrip 2021, which the ADL will note to you outstripped 2020 by a figure of 34% increase in hate. And we're on pace now to outstrip that. And this, in a period of time that began roughly in 2015 or 2016, after some period of calm, but which is a wave that just seems to be building. And it's hard to know almost where to start wrapping your head around that. But I know that after Colleyville, there was some conversation here in Akron. Why did it seem like there was a near quiet after Houston, after the synagogue hostage taking? What would it have taken to have gotten noticed when we noticed in our synagogues, and we're increasing our police presence, and we're locking the doors again, and it feels like, is anybody else noticing? And so the proposition was to begin having a conversation here in Akron, in religious and spiritual Akron, to see how we could make our neighbors feel safer in their own community. And so we were happy that Temple Israel invited Akron Area Interfaith to an anti-Semitism series that you were sponsoring. And when it came our time, we have put together this series ourselves and hopefully continuing the conversation. We did have evening one last Thursday. It was Dr. Christopher Seaman, a professor of theology at Walsh University, who gave us his take on the history of anti-Semitism. This evening, you are present for Jim Pasch, the regional director of the ADL, for an exploration of the factors that surround anti-Semitism in America today. And then in 2 weeks, on evening 3, will be November 17th, again 7 to 8:30. That will be at St. Hilary's Catholic Church, 2750 West Market here in Fair Lawn. And that will be a panel discussion, strength in numbers, what our interfaith community can do together. So I just bring your attention to still the continuation of the series. This evening, I just want to push right ahead and get to him. Evening 2, Rising Numbers, Anti-Semitism in America. Today, James Pasch, the regional director of the ADL. An exploration of the factors that might help us to understand the striking rise in hate crimes directed at Jews right now and in our country today. In 2019, James Pasch became the Cleveland Regional Director of the ADL, serving Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Western Pennsylvania, having previously served on ADL's regional board. He is serving in this role during a particularly challenging time with incidents of anti-Semitism rising in an unprecedented amount across the region. In leading the ADL Cleveland office, he has launched a pro bono legal assistance program to assist victims of hate crimes in Ohio. Under his leadership, ADL's No Place for Hate programming has grown over 100% region-wide. He has focused on growing anti-bias programming in K-12 schools because we know no one is born with hate in their hearts. He graduated from the University of Vermont, earned his law degree at Case Western Reserve University School of Law. Mr. Pasch served as Case Western Reserve Law School's Assistant Dean of Development and External Affairs during the law school's capital campaign. He has also served 2 terms as a councilman in Beechwood, where he led the city's passage of its anti-discrimination ordinance. Jim and his wife Carly and their 2 children live in Beechwood, and I would like to welcome them here to our home this evening.
I felt that maybe you were just going to give my talk, which I was okay with, Tom. I was like, oh, the statistics are already out there. Everyone knows what they have to know. Thank you, Tom. Thank you to Temple Israel. Thank you to the Akron Interfaith Council for having me this evening. It's an honor to be here with all of you. And thank you for being here. Showing up is half the battle, and you're showing up. You're willing to listen, and you're willing to work for a better future. And so I thank you so much for being where you are today. So who wants the good news first? Because I got to tell you, the rest of the presentation ain't great as far as good news goes. So the good news is, when you look around this room, you should be heartened that everywhere I go, I am convinced that there is more of us than there are of them. Incidents might be rising, anti-Semitism might be rising, racism might be rising, incidents of hate across the board might be rising, but there is an unequivocal combined voice that says no. Not so fast, not on our watch. We are going to leave this world a better, safer, and kinder place for our children and our grandchildren. And that's what I get up every day working to do. I know that's what all you care about, which is why you're having these series of conversations that you're having, so that you can educate yourselves and learn how to join the fight in a more informed way. Right? We're all doing our part to fight back against the rising tide of hate and anti-Semitism. And so I'll end tonight, when I end tonight, talking about things we could do. But I wanted to start the night, before I get into the statistics and where we are, I wanted to start the night to let you know it's a fight we're going to win. We always have won it. We will win it again. The fight against anti-Semitism never goes away, but we always find a way to persist. So I'll start from that vantage point. My journey, my personal journey to become the ADL director was unique. Because if you had told me 10, 15 years ago that I was going to devote my career to the fight against anti-Semitism, I probably would have said, I mean, I get that it's there, but we're fine. As a young lawyer, I joined ADL's Youth Leadership Institute, called GLI regionally. I went through a whole ADL year of programming with a cohort of colleagues. And then after that, I joined the ADL Regional Board. I was a board member with Marty, who's sitting over here. We've grown, actually, since I became director, the board involvement in the Akron area. We now have 3 board members that sit in the greater Akron area. And when I was sitting on the board in 2019, was when the shooting happened at Tree of Life. I got a phone call that morning from Anita Gray, who was the former director of this ADL office and a close and dear friend of mine still. And Anita said that she was organizing a group of board members to go down to Pittsburgh to both attend the funerals and Shivas and to just provide any modicum of support that we could provide to the Pittsburgh Jewish community and to the families, the 11 families that have just lost their loved ones. I immediately got in my car to drive to Pittsburgh. the day after for the funerals. We've become desensitized in the United States to incidents of mass violence and mass shootings. When you see one up close, it rips away that desensitized feeling that we have come to feel in the United States, especially when it's your home, your religion, and that the people who were murdered because they were there to practice their religion on the Sabbath. It's a level of pain that was indescribable to witness. And I remember the drive home like it was yesterday, because I sat there in utter silence for 2.5 hours, just trying to breathe and take in what I had just witnessed. No podcasts, no phone calls, wasn't checking my phone. I was just trying to gather my thoughts, and I knew when I pulled on my driveway that I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I had to get off the sidelines in a bigger way, that I wanted to dedicate my career to ensuring that my Jewish children were going to be safe. I remember where I was when I decided to take this job, because I didn't know what was next for me. I was just serving on the board. The former director decided a few months after Tree of Life to resign his position from the ADL, and I was at Hillcrest Hospital when it happened because my son had just been born. And my phone pinged. I got an email, and I looked down at my phone. I read the email. I handed my son back to my wife. I went in the hallway and I called the board chair and a couple other board members, and I said, I will leave my job if I could lead the ADL in this region. And the rest is history. So the reason why I'm standing in front of you is because of the effect that when I witnessed the aftermath of the most violent anti-Semitic attack that had ever occurred on American soil, which took place in our ADL region, I said to myself, enough, no more. And that to me is the rallying cry. Just last week, I was in Pittsburgh for the 4-year anniversary, and you should know, 4 years later, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people gather to honor the 11 members of our community that were lost. Jews and non-Jews, black and white and Asian, all walks of life are there year in and year out to support the Jewish community and to say never again. So that leads us to a conversation about the fight against modern anti-Semitism. Where are we today? Where do we need to go? And how are we going to get there? Right? Those are the 3 pillars of what I'm going to try to address. Let's flip on the slides. All right. I just want, for a matter of brief introduction, for those of you that don't know, ADL was formed in 1913. We have the same exact mission today that we did back then, to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and secure justice and fair treatment for all. We are the world's oldest and largest anti-hate organization. We have 25 offices throughout the United States, and really our work could fall into 3 buckets, I like to say. We investigate, we advocate, and we educate. When hate crimes get reported into us or anti-Semitic incidents get reported into us, we investigate them. We work with the constituents. Sometimes that means working with law enforcement. Sometimes that means working with employers or universities. We advocate for changes. Sometimes that's state legislation, federal legislation. Sometimes it means defeating state legislation, as it seems like it's a continual thing we've had to do here in the state of Ohio recently, most recently with Ohio's, quote, divisive concepts bill. And then we educate. We're in schools, we're in synagogues, When I took over the ADL, we were in 20 schools. This year, we will be in over 75 schools in just our 3.5 state coverage. All right? It's about, when I think about our education work, it's about winning over hearts and minds. The way I approach our work is that you could try to win the Twitter battle of the day, or you could try to win the long-term war for what's right in the world. Right? So I'm less interested about the quick press release, and I'm more interested in doing the hard work in classrooms with our students and with faculty and with staff. Next slide. Excellent. And if we could just click through the slide so that everything pops up. Thank you. I want to start off with some basics when it comes to tackling hate. And this is kind of what I say across the board. I go into situations knowing that bias is universal and we all have our own biases. Period, full stop. Hate is learned and hate can be unlearned. All forms of hate are serious and damaging, and if we don't learn how to tackle all of them, we don't win the battle against hate. Hate speech is best combated by anti-hate speech, and hate speech never ends with just hate speech. It builds into violence, which is why we have to tackle it at its root. Next slide, please. Scroll down. And this is a really important part of this presentation because I get asked all the time, how do you define anti-Semitism? What is anti-Semitism? Right? In its most basic form, anti-Semitism is any prejudice or discrimination against Jews as individuals, as a group, for being Jews. And it's based largely on age-old anti-Semitic stereotypes and myths that target Jews as a people. The other question that I will get to more in depth later on in this presentation is I get a question a lot about when does criticism of Israel bleed into anti-Semitism, which is happening more and more and more, especially on college campuses today. And we always look at the 3 Ds when we demonize, delegitimize, and hold Israel to a double standard. And we ask, a lot of times now what we're seeing on college campuses, we ask American students, American Jewish students, to defend the state of Israel as if they have to defend the government's actions when they take action. And so it's continued to raise its ugly head, especially in the past couple of years. And I'll get into some statistics that deal with anti-Zionism and anti-Israel behavior on college campuses. Next slide, please. Jews are 2% of the U.S. population. What percentage of hate crimes total do you think are anti-Jewish hate crimes? Anyone? 60. Well, that would be really high. No. It's 13% of all hate crimes. So we're 2% of the world and 13% of all hate crimes. Disproportionate, right? Over 6 times the amount of Jews that exist is the percentage of hate crimes that are recorded. Next slide. The 60% is when you talk about religious hate crimes. Right? Jews make up 60% of all religious-based hate crimes in the United States. A staggering number when you think of how small we are as a community. An absolutely staggering number. So when we talk about, in the opening here about congregants not feeling safe at synagogue, wanting more protection, right? I mean, that's what they're looking at. And that's why people feel the way that they currently feel in our community. Next slide. So every year, the ADL does an audit of anti-Semitic incidents across the United States. We track 3 categories. assaults, harassment, and vandalism. We've been tracking this since the 1970s. As was mentioned in the open, 2021 was our highest year ever on record. Our highest year ever on record. 2022, surprise alert, just shows no signs of slowing down. All right? When we look at the general trend, all you have to see is the triple-digit % increase since 2016. And when you're looking at regional incidents, which I'll have a slide about that talks about later, in the state of Ohio, we passed over 50 incidents this past year, which is the most in our history of assaults, vandalism, and harassment against the Jewish people. We're only a few years removed from reporting single-digit incidents in the state each year. And 2021 was our highest year on record. 2020 was the highest year before that. 2019 was the highest year before. You get the pattern, right? So I don't really have to quote statistics for everyone in this room to know that the environment is what it is right now. We feel it in the environment. We feel the ground shifting underneath of us. But the statistics back up that gut feeling that you have. Next slide, please. Other key findings in our audit report to make everyone aware of. Right? 167% increase in assaults against the Jewish people, 61% increase in incidents targeting Jewish institutions, 52% increase in anti-Semitic propaganda by white supremacist groups, incidents reported in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Right? When you break out the math, you're talking about over 3 incidents every single day in this country of Jews being targeted. Every single day. Next slide. Why I concentrate so much on working with our kids. A, it's where we have the ability to make the biggest impact, and also where we're seeing statistical rises. Whether it's in our K through 12 schools or on our college campuses, we are seeing a significant statistical uptick. I spoke Friday night at the Love, Peace, and Honor Shabbat at Miami University of Ohio, 2 weeks after their sukkah was desecrated and flipped over. Right? The challenges that they've had on campus are not unique, though. They're widespread. And it ranges from Miami University of Ohio to my alma mater at the University of Vermont, who has recently also had problems at their Hillel. Right? So the environment has made its way into where our youth are learning and living, and to me, it's one of the most important areas for us to concentrate on. Next slide, please. This is kind of what I touched on a little bit earlier. You just see kind of this staggering charts and graphs in this region alone that we cover. And I haven't even shown you a graph for Kentucky, which is eye-popping as well. But just, a few years ago, we're double where we are in the amount of incidents we're responding to. And to give everyone an idea of how we the anti-Semitic audit report is after we complete the audit after the calendar year and we determine that something should really be classified as an anti-Semitic incident. But as far as incidents we're responding to in real time every day, anti-Semitic and non-anti-Semitic incidents alike, in April of this year, we surpassed where we were in 2021. And the amount of incidents our office responded to. So, at the end of Q1 of this year, we had passed all of the 2021 incidents. So I think let that sink in, not just as a harbinger for anti-Semitic incidents, but the rise of hate in general that we've seen throughout our communities. Next slide, please. Important to note that there's always some key indicators where we see massive spikes of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, and we particularly measured the anti-Semitic increase in the United States for a 1-month period during the Israel-Hamas conflict that took place. And when you look at the statistics in May 2020 versus May 2021, right, we saw a 75% increase across the board, right? So important to note that when there is conflict in the Middle East that involves Israel, anti-Semitic activity increases significantly here in the United States. Next slide. I'm not going to go into great depth about this because you kind of covered the history of anti-Semitic incidents a couple weeks ago with a professor from Walsh University, but I just want to talk to you about our Anti-Semitism Uncovered guide. I highly recommend that you go and you read and you watch the videos. For each one of these age-old anti-Semitic tropes, we've put together a video that's a couple minutes long and pretty powerful and informative. But we are continuing to see modern anti-Semitism rear its ugly head, but it all goes back to these 10 original groundings of where anti-Semitism comes from. You know, the idea that Jews are all powerful, right? That's what we saw in Colleyville. Right? Somebody flew across the ocean to a synagogue in Texas and thought that if he walked into a synagogue to demand the release of a federal prisoner, that we were so powerful, the rabbi was just going to make a phone call and a federal prisoner would be released. I mean, that is based on like the oldest anti-Semitic trope in the book. That we are these powerful masters that control everything that goes on behind the scenes. Whether it was Colleyville, we've seen it in the last 2 weeks, from the top of the entertainment industry to the sporting world. You know, I would gladly take any questions that you guys have at the end, whether it's about Kanye or Kyrie or anything in between. But the most damaging part of when anti-Semitism comes from the top of our world in that way, whether it's the top of our political world, whether it's the top of our athletic world, whether it's the top of the entertainment world, those words are powerful because those individuals have so many followers. Kanye West has so many more social media followers than Jews that exist in this world. And to use his platform to parrot the oldest, most horrific anti-Semitic tropes that exist is truly damaging. We immediately saw white supremacist groups parroting his words, hanging banners over highways that said Kanye was right, using him as a spokesperson for their mission and their voice. If you go to their online world, they were gleeful. They had a spokesperson now on the top of the entertainment industry. And so it's not just the individual words that are harmful, it's the spread of those words. I think back, who here by show of hands has watched the recent Ken Burns documentary? Okay. Thank you for watching it. There's a scene that really sticks out in my mind where a young American soldier who's a part of the liberation of one of the camps writes a note home to his father about the horrors that he has seen. But he says in the note, it's not just the horrors that I have witnessed with my own eyes. My greatest fear is who knows how far the ideas have spread. Who knows how far the ideas have spread? Words matter. Words are powerful. And when words are echoed by powerful people in our world, they carry weight. So, That's why the last couple weeks have been so troubling, right? Because those words reverberate and they have real world effect for all of us. Next slide, please. What do we attribute some of the rise of anti-Semitism to over the last couple of years? Well, I could tell you one of the things that really happened, this goes back to one of the original forms of anti-Semitism, is we saw a ton of anti-Semitism surrounding COVID and the rise of conspiracy theories around disease, which is an age-old anti-Semitic trope. It happened before in our history, and it reared its ugly head from signs outside of a state house, and right here in Ohio, with the individual holding the real plague with the Star of David inside of the rat that was outside our state house, to school board members in this state who have actively compared mandatory vaccinations to the policies of Nazi Germany, to individuals wearing yellow Jewish stars, saying non-vaccinated. It was a continual refrain that we saw not just in Ohio, but throughout the country. We had students, when schools got back in Cuyahoga County, that were calling it the Jew flu. And, what I could say, and this is, I felt like I sounded like a broken record during the pandemic saying this, but there is zero similarities between the policies of Nazi Germany and health protocols to keep people alive during a worldwide pandemic because you needed a shot to go to your favorite restaurant. Insane. And dishonors the lives and the memories of the 6 million Jews and 11 million people that were murdered at the hands of the Nazis. There's no place for it. And there's certainly no place for it amongst leadership. So we've seen a rise of anti-Semitic remarks from school boards to state houses throughout this country. It has to stop. The Holocaust comparisons have to stop. The rise of anti-Semitism has to stop. We must demand more from our elected officials, and they must act accordingly. Right? We need, if we're going to tackle a rise of anti-Semitism, we need an all-of-society approach, from civic leaders to political leaders to business and boardroom leaders. We need everybody to put a stop to the rise that we're seeing, and we need people to use their pulpits, no matter what office they have or what position of power they hold, to speak out against anti-Semitism and hate wherever and whenever they see it, no exceptions asked. Right, that's what we need. Next slide. Just bear with me for a second. Is it working? If not, I could riff. So, that's definitely not the next slide. All right. Question I get all the time, and it's a tough one to answer. What's causing the rise? Why are we seeing such a rise? And the reality is there is not one particular reason for the rise. And let me get the tough question out of the way because I know it'll get asked, and there's not one specific person who's responsible for the whole rise, okay? There are a multitude of factors that go into the rise of hate and anti-Semitism, but it's a combination of it being normalized. The increasing polarization of the United States has certainly not been helpful. We have massive anxiety that people have been building up, especially during the pandemic, when everyone was at home for 2 years, diving into these deep, dark online worlds. The spread of hate on social media, which is a massive, massive factor in what we're seeing, from mainstream platforms to some less known platforms, and the continued politicalization of hate and anti-Semitism. It's a political football now between the left and the right, and the only people that lose when anti-Semitism becomes a political football are the Jews. It just needs to be condemned by everybody on both sides of the political aisle, and we've lost that. So it's not one factor, it's a whole host of factors, and I could get more into that. Next slide. People have asked, and I told you earlier I'd get back to this, how do you know when something crosses the line from anti-Israel to anti-Semitism? Here's a few examples, right? And we see it frequently, right? When the Israeli flag gets morphed, when you start comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, when you start banning Jews from gay pride parades because you don't support the state of Israel, the imagery that you will see cross over really quickly from anti-Israel to anti-Semitism and morphs pretty quickly. But I wanted to show you some of the images we've seen recently. Next slide. And I talked about where we're seeing the most anti-Israel activity and anti-Semitism activity on college campuses, right? Where we have 31% who have witnessed anti-Semitic activity in the last year, and 43% of students have either experienced and or witnessed anti-Semitism on their college campuses in the last year. What have we done with this? ADL has partnered with Hillel. We've created a joint reporting portal. So let's say you are a student at Ohio University and you witness an anti-Semitic act, or you're a victim of an anti-Semitic act. You could go report that act. It will land both on my computer and the Hillel director's computer simultaneously. So then we will hop on the phone with one another and figure out how to respond together. Right? So there's a coordinated response between different agencies. Next slide. Important to note, when we fight anti-Semitism, we fight all forms of hate, and so we track all forms of hate on our Center on Extremism. And this is in real time. You could go online. This is something called our heat map, where we track a variety of incidents across the nation, from white supremacist events, white supremacist propaganda, anti-Semitic incidents, terrorist plots and attacks. That way we could see where our hotspots are, where we need to make investments, law enforcement, etc. We work very closely with law enforcement when things like this are reported into us. And next slide, I'll show you why. When we look at some of the major attacks, recent attacks in our history, whether it's Pittsburgh, New Zealand, El Paso, Poway, if you go over the time from when we have an indicator, i.e., a statement or a blog post or a manifesto that's been released or a video that's been released, we have anywhere from 24 minutes to 16 hours to stop that attack from occurring. To find that information on the internet, we have anywhere from a few minutes to less than a day. So that is why we're continually tracking, we're continually sharing information with law enforcement to do the best we can from stopping these attacks before they actually occur. Next slide, please. One of the greatest forms of the spread of hate, the spread of anti-Semitism that we've seen, is the spread of hate in our online worlds, right? Why are extremists using the online world? Well, they can remain anonymous, it's instant, and they create large and growing echo chambers for themselves. Right? They could use algorithms to lead moderate users into more extremist content. And then all of a sudden, those users are then surrounded by other people. It's informing the way they think. It allows them to coordinate their activities more effectively. And the online world provides new ways for them to raise capital. These are all the reasons why you see a spread of extremist ideologies and groups in our online worlds. Next slide, please. We put out a report every year on online hate and harassment, and we have almost 60% of Americans believe that online hate and harassment are making hate crimes more common. Right? And we have 53% of United States adults who have experienced harassment online, right? With a good percentage, almost a quarter, who've received physical threats. Next slide, please. How do we fight hate online? First, when you see something, if you're a Facebook user, if you're a Twitter user, you should report it. Right? If you see hate on that platform, report what you're seeing. It will actually lead to stuff getting taken down under terms of service agreements. We've had a good amount of success. When you see there was a massive decrease in QAnon conspiracy followers after Twitter banned QAnon from their platform. We saw a huge spike. Twitter took action, and then in the purple, a massive drop-off, right, of QAnon conspiracy theories because they were kicked off the platform. Right? Why are we concerned now? Well, we shall see. What I will tell you is that what Jonathan Greenblatt, our CEO, said today on MSNBC is he had a great meeting with Elon Musk yesterday, not just with ADL, but with the president of the NAACP, with Color of Change, with a lot of the major civil rights players across this country. He was engaged, he was listening, and he has made a commitment not to bring anyone back onto the platform in the immediate future while they look at what their content moderation process is going to be and what their process is going to be to judge who is or who is not allowed back on the platform, and that there will be members of the civil rights community who are part of that decision-making. Actions speak louder than words, but at least the words now. And then Elon went on Twitter to tweet about the meeting and said that that is what he agreed to do. So we will see where it goes. But yeah, no, listen, there is a danger of so much, which by the way is more cooperation than Mark Zuckerberg has ever given with Facebook. So but there is a danger to a few individuals controlling the social media airways. But next slide. I can't talk about anti-Semitism without talking about the connection between anti-Semitism and white supremacy. I don't have to play the video clip, but the video clip is something that everyone in this room has probably heard several times by now. But if you go back to 2016, you go back to Charlottesville, right? It's a seminal moment of kind of the birth of modern anti-Semitism in the white supremacist movement, right? You have this moment of action in Charlottesville during the Unite the Right rally, where hundreds and hundreds of men with tiki torches are marching towards a synagogue, and they are chanting, "The Jews will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us. The Jews will not replace us." Next slide. Oh, sorry. You could play. So the Unite the Right in Charlottesville was organized to, quote, protect the Robert E. Lee Confederate statute. So why were they chanting, "The Jews will not replace us," and what did the Jews have to do with it? Anyone know? Okay. Next slide. I always like to quote our friend Eric Ward, who said, "What is this arch nemesis of the white race whose machinations have prevented the natural and inevitable imposition of white supremacy? It is, of course, the Jews. Jews function for today's white nationalists, as they often have for anti-Semites through the centuries, as the demon stirring an otherwise changing and heterogeneous pot of lesser evils." What does Eric mean, right? What Eric is trying to say here, and what that chant meant, right, is that Jews were the all-powerful puppet masters behind the scenes, preventing the ultimate control of the white race. We were the people in charge of leading on immigration reform. We were the people in charge of trying to get DEI initiatives going. We were like, this is the mind of the white nationalists, right? And Jews were preventing the superior race, the white race, from rising to the top, which is why you have the chant, "The Jews will not replace us." There is this through line of anti-Semitism that existed between the two seminal events of Charlottesville and the January 6th insurrection. From the chants to the Camp Auschwitz t-shirts inside of the Capitol building. Anti-Semitism is the heartbeat of white nationalism. Slide. The original creator of the Daily Stormer, which is one of the largest online white supremacist publications that exist, was started by an individual named Andrew Anglin, who said this: "All enemies should be combined into one enemy, which is the Jews. This is pretty much objectively true. If we didn't have the Jews, we could figure out how to deal with non-whites. Same deal with women. Women should be attacked, but there should always be mention that if it wasn't for the Jews, they would be acting normally. The Jews should always be at the beginning and the end of every problem. From poverty to poor family dynamics, to war to the destruction of the rainforest." Right? Right? The laughter is there, right? But this is the oldest anti-Semitic tropes that exist, right? Jews are all powerful. We control everything from poverty to environmental destruction, to COVID, right? And so bear in mind that while white supremacist groups might have different mindsets and different goals, they could really all come together over their hatred towards the Jews. And so, as I said, there is no separation between white supremacy and anti-Semitism. Next slide. So what are we going to do about the rise of white supremacy in the United States, the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States? As I said in the beginning, all is not lost. The statistics might be depressing. Their rise is certainly troubling, but they are a minority of the viewpoint in this nation. This nation is filled with great, loving, kind individuals of all races and all religions and all ethnicities and all creeds. And what are we going to do to push back? Sorry. First, just some trends that, right, we all have to take into account that I already talked about earlier, right? We've gone over all this, but this is what we need, what we're dealing with in real time, right? So when people are like, "Hey, what's the struggle? What are we seeing?" Right? There's a rise in incidents. The political environment couldn't be less helpful right now. We have threats from across the political spectrum, from the far right to the far left. There's growth in hate online. We have young people returning to college campuses and schools now post-COVID, so we'll see more growth of incidents. People feel more brazen to come out with their incidents, and there's a greater demand on us and other civic organizations about how to respond. So next slide. Okay. You know, when I started out, I said that we all had a role to play in the fight against anti-Semitism and hate. And some of it's really basic, but really important. Gone are the days of us just sitting silent when we hear something. Or somebody says something that we don't like and we're just like, they don't know any better, and we walk away. You got to correct the behavior. You have to speak out. And so one of the things I always tell people is it's important to know how to respond to anti-Semitism. Sometimes the act is intentional, sometimes it's not intentional and requires education. Right? Think before you act. What do you want to accomplish in the interaction? Consider what options you might have to engage in respectful dialogue, whether it's a Thanksgiving Day table, whether it's with a work colleague around the water cooler. Right? There's a way to assume good intent with people and then explain the impact that their remarks are having. Right? Like if I'm online waiting to go buy something and somebody shoves in the front of a line and then somebody else says, just another one of those pushy Jews from New York. Right? Maybe in the past I would have just shrugged it off. Right? But everyone knows that's a New York thing and not a Jewish thing, right? So I could say that I'm a New Yorker, okay? But seriously, you have to start correcting people, right? You can't let comments like that slide anymore, because those age-old phrases, right, are coming back and they're leading to other things. Right? There was an incident I dealt with at Ohio State this past year where we had a professor who was using the term "Jew 'em down" during class. Right? There was an educational gap that existed there. And there was learning that needed to be done. Right? But people have to report it and speak out against it and change the behavior. Right? We just can't stay silent anymore. Next slide. Different ways to get involved. We bring anti-bias training and resources, not just to schools, but to communities. If you own a business or you know somebody who does, we'll come in with our trainers, we'll run some anti-bias courses for your organization, for your leadership. I always pass out all of our online advocacy work on our civil rights issues, not just so people know what we do, not just for the Jewish community, but for the non-Jewish community, right? We have to fight all forms of hate. I always say, I respond to the non-anti-Semitic incidents the same way I respond to the anti-Semitic ones. So when I had a school district on one side of my region where a video went viral because they had a active shooter training at the school, and the people who were playing the shooters walked into the school with air guns and Muslim headwear on, and then a video went on Instagram, and then from Instagram to the main news networks. I did not go on Twitter and release a statement. I did not call Channel 8. I picked up the phone. I called the superintendent. I said, "How are you doing today?" He said, "Well, James, I've had better days. Thank you for being the first person to not call and scream at me today." Right? The next day, went down there with my education director, my staff, and then the school board voted and funded a curriculum for staff and faculty of anti-bias training for the year. Right? Then I'll do my media release. But, as I said in the beginning, hearts and minds, right? There were two things that either happened there, which is one, the faculty that put on those costumes, right, that they should have never put on, right? Either thought that it was okay or didn't know that what they were doing was wrong. Neither is acceptable, right? So you have to go in, you have to explain how offensive that is to put on the headwear of another religion and to walk into a building like that. Outside of the fact that I think every single school shooting has been a white male, so they could have just gone in as themselves. But that's besides the point, right? We have to deal with all forms of hate. Right? We can't have forms of hate growing against the LGBTQ community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, the Black community, the massive rise of hate crimes against the Asian community during COVID. None of it's acceptable, and it all has to be responded to with equal levels of care and veracity. Next slide. Yeah, one of the things before I take questions that I'll say, and I kind of skipped that slide before I should, is we ask that you report anything that you see. And when I say report, I mean safely, right? If it's a violence issue and you're in danger, get out of danger, call 911, right? Report it to law enforcement. If it's something that you've witnessed, vandalism, right? Spray painting of a swastika, anything like that, take a photo, fill out the report incident form on our website. All you have to do is Google ADL, right? And it will immediately pop up. Fill it out. Don't just walk past it and say someone will clean it up. We only know what we know. Right? And tracking numbers is important because it gives an indication for not just us but the nation of what we're seeing out there on the ground. So we need all of you to be our eyes and ears. Right? Our information is only as good as the information that you give us. So we are excited to partner with you, to work with you and your community to make a positive impact. Because together, that's what we're going to do. And with that, questions.
Someone who was here or with us last week already has their question filled out on their card. When you first came in, you received cards. If you did not receive a card, I can come around and bring that to you. I will bring that to you as soon as we get this question started right here so that he can begin to answer. Does anyone else need cards? Wonderful. I'll bring those to you. Do you need pens as well? We'll be right there. Right. We'll be with that question in just a moment, ma'am. He has, would you like to read your question?
Yes.
By all means.
I have a book, and I have two selections to share. To ask, are they anti-Semitic?
Oh.
Shall I read the...
Do you, I mean, if you have a book and you want to, just show me something afterwards, I could take a look. I could always, read it in context to what it is. I don't know what the book is, but maybe that's like a better question answered offline where I could actually read the writings and then give you an adequate response rather than off the cuff.
Okay, sounds good.
That sounds good. All right.
If I gave you a pen when you first came in, please be advised that they are very new pens. They have a wax tip on the very tip so that you cannot write with them until you remove the wax. We have, and I am not sure who this question is from. No, but it matters that I don't have on my reading glasses. So, not just the reading glasses.
Something are Jewish persons treated with feelings of hate? I can't get the first word. Because of this, the color of your skin, how are persons identified as Jews?
We'll get some clarification on that question. If you can go ahead and read your question for us. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Please also know, the reason as to why I am here is for my own personal education, right? And I'm hopeful that information will be shared just so that I will have a better sense as to the nature of the hate and the feelings that individuals who are identified as Jews may experience. So the question is, and it may be just a bit, naive, but please forgive, my inquiry. And it reads, why are Jewish persons treated with feelings of hate? And more likely than not, many of you here may already know the reason why. And if the question is so immature, perhaps it can be addressed, individually, rather than taking your time just to, to explain what it is that I don't know. And the other part of it is, because of the color of your skin, how are persons identified as Jews? And as I said, it may be very, very immature or naive, but it's something that
It's a very good question.
Yeah. So I'll take your second question first, right? Which is, right, Jews are not a monolith, right? So there are black Jews and there are brown Jews and there are white Jews and there are Jews that wear kippahs and Jews that don't. There are Jews that are recognizable to the naked eye as Jews and Jews that are not. Right. So there's no there's no one answer to. Right? How are Jews recognized or not recognized in the world? The answer is it depends, right? You are correct that when I walk down the street, there's nobody that would know necessarily that I am a Jew, right? I don't wear a kippah, I don't display, I don't wear a Star of David, right? So there's no there's no symbol, right? But my brother walks around with a Star of David chain, right? So it really just depends, right? There's not any one key identifier, right, for Jews to the naked eye. The question of why is there Jew hatred in the world? Right? It's I always say it's the world's oldest form of hate. Right? Or sometimes I say anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, right, is the canary in the coal mine of hate. Right? Once you know that there's anti-Semitism, you will soon see all the other forms of hate that derive from it. But it is the world's original and oldest form of hate. It's been around since the beginning of time, right? Whether it's fear of the other, whether it's irrational feelings about a minority group. It has been around as long as we have existed.
Thank you so much for your question. We'll have this gentleman with his question. Do I have other questions that we need to get to? Yes, on several sides. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you do with politicians and other name people that say anti-Semitic comments and then say, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I really didn't mean it, but then go on and do it again?
As a former elected official, I will say that the idea that anyone would use their position, their elected position, to spread anti-Semitism or hate is beyond reprehensible. And not just that, you should be using that position of power to call it out unequivocally, whether it's from your supporters or your non-supporters. I think, I touched on this earlier, but the fight about anti-Semitism should never be political. You shouldn't just feel like you should call it out if you're a Democrat, or you should call it out if you're a Republican. You should just call it out. And so the answer about what to do, that's up to the public. Right? There's an election next week. Vote. Vote. Vote for the leaders that you want to see in those positions. Vote for people who will speak out against hate. Use your constitutional right and go cast that ballot. That too. Common sense is always a good thing.
We have a question here.
Yeah.
My cousin and I have a cousin whose mother-in-law was killed in Pittsburgh. So we have been involved with that for these last 4 years. And it happens that today I had many conversations with them, and a debate rages there among the victims' families and another person regarding what should be the disposition of the perpetrator who goes on trial next April. And I found my own beliefs very challenged by that, and the debate is, should he have the death penalty or should he have life in prison? And the argument that, the one side of the argument by our family was that if he is allowed to be in prison for the rest of his life, which clearly means therefore the death penalty, then he is allowed to spend time with a lot of people who already have those conspiracy type leanings, and to then some of them may get out of prison and they will spread them. We are feeding and clothing him, and this is detrimental to everybody. On the other side, isn't that hate, more hate, to kill a person who is a person and he is alive, though he's despicable? That's how I felt too.
The first thing I will just say is I'm so incredibly sorry for your loss. I'm incredibly sorry about how close you are. It shows that as a people we're only one step removed at any given moment. Feeling about this specific case, right? It's not that I'm trying to not answer your question, okay? It's that I'm not going to tell, nor do I feel like I have any position to do so, how the 11 families should grieve and what they feel should or shouldn't be the proper judicial outcome between the death penalty and life in prison. I don't believe that's my role. There are reasons for those individuals to feel the way that they feel, and those feelings are valid, whether or not I agree with them or you agree with them. That's an extraordinarily tough position for them to be in. And I'm going to respect the process that those families are a part of and that the Department of Justice is a part of. And I'm not going to personally weigh in. I could have a personal conversation with you after about my feelings of the death penalty versus life in prison, but that's a much longer conversation and not really an ADL-related conversation. a conversation that I have thoughts about as a recovering attorney, and I could talk to you about those.
One of your slides said that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic when one of these three is true.
Yeah.
Demonization, delegitimization, or double standard. Could you give an example of statements that would fall into those categories?
Sure. Israel is frequently held to a double standard in the international world for the actions of its government, right? So if you're going to criticize the state of Israel for something, are you also criticizing another foreign government who's doing the same exact thing? Or are you only criticizing the state of Israel for that action? Are you criticizing the state of Israel for something that your own country does? Right? So why is it that it's always the state of Israel that's being targeted? That's a double standard that we're talking about. When we're talking about when we hear individuals saying, you're not loyal to the United States as an American Jew, you're just loyal to the state of Israel. So you're making viewpoints that are not aligned with us here, but you're more concerned with what's going on over there, right? Questioning American Jews as to their belief in Israel, right? So we see it play out in a variety of ways where it crosses from criticism of specific actions of the Israeli government to something that's different. Criticizing a specific action that a government takes is not anti-Semitic. If criticizing an action of a government was anti-Semitic, most Israelis would be deemed anti-Semitic, right? It's not, it's not true, right? There are plenty of Israelis that are critical of their own government, right? It's when it morphs from criticism of an individual action to a criticism of a nation's existence. And that continues to morph pretty rapidly in our society.
It's a complicated question, but
Oh, those are my favorite.
oh, good. You began with positive remarks, but I'm wondering, when do you worry? When you look at Germany and you had the beginnings of anti-Semitism. How is this different than that? So my question is around that.
Yeah, and when do you worry? I mean, you worry now, right? Now's a good time to start worrying. My boss, our CEO, wrote a book entitled "It Could Happen Here," right? And he wrote it because it could happen here, right? But it's time to worry. That's why you're here, right? It's how do we turn that worry into action, right? I don't want to sound the alarm that I think we're gonna wake up tomorrow and it's gonna be Nazi Germany. I don't believe that to be true, right? But we have to take proper precautions, proper actions to understand the heightened level of anti-Semitism and to understand how unacceptable that is, right? When Tom introduced this today, Tom rattled off the headlines from today. From today, right? And that is, right, we should be concerned enough to figure out, okay, how are we going to push back against this so that it doesn't grow, right? I think about this afternoon before I came here, and I was watching a clip of the Brooklyn Nets made Kyrie Irving available for media this afternoon, right? And he was asked, do you hold any anti-Semitic beliefs? He talked for 3 minutes. The answer is no, right? No, you do not, don't hold anti-Semitic beliefs. There's no, that is the correct answer to that question. And if you can't answer no to that, we have a problem. Right? We have to sit down, we have to talk about what that problem is and how we're going to solve it. Right? And I say that as somebody who was in as many games as I possibly could to cheer him on in the city of Cleveland, right? And so, it is really hard to hear that, especially from somebody who I used to watch all the time. But we have to speak out against it. And we will, and we have, right? We have to continue to meet with the NBA and the Brooklyn Nets, and we have to get Kyrie the education material so that he understands, right? Look at that in real time. Look what happens. I don't check Elon Musk's Twitter for 5 minutes and I miss out.
Say that again, please.
Breaking news, the Nets just suspended Kyrie, deemed unfit by the Association of the Brooklyn Nets. He will serve a suspension without pay until he satisfies a series of objective remedial measures that address the harmful impact of his conduct, and the suspension period served will be no less than 5 games. So it's a start.
Yeah, and you know why? Because the answer to that question had to be no. No. Right?
5.
But it sounds like an indefinite until he's willing to learn.
Until he gets better.
Until he gets better. Yeah.
You were mentioning specific people's names. Was I correct in identifying the picture of the man over the word denial as Franklin Graham?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the individual picture, but I could go back and look.
He would be another influential person in the Christian world, but I don't know what the denial is. I'm not aware of it, but the face I recognized.
Okay, I'll go back and look and get you confirmation.
So we talked about how offhanded comments and uneducated jokes exasperates anti-Semitism, and I'm probably the youngest person in the room right now. And as a younger person, I will hear the comments, well, when I was younger, it was okay. You're just being sensitive. It's not that big of a deal. Or your generation's just too sensitive, stuff like that. So how do you respond to that comment if you're talking about, like, hey, this comment or this joke that you made is actually really hurtful, and they come back with that? What's a good response to respond with?
So, I think, it depends a little bit on your comfort level and your closeness to who you're talking to. Right, so I don't fully want to put myself in your shoes. I would never presume to do that, right? But depending on your comfort level, right, you could talk to them about, right, intent versus impact, right? It might your intent might not have been harmful, but the impact you're having is harmful, and here's why. And maybe you'll have an audience with that person, maybe you won't. It really depends on who you're talking to. Are you comfortable having that conversation with them, right? Is it an acquaintance, or is it, an uncle at the Thanksgiving Day table, right? Those allows you to have different levels of conversation, right? And I leave that, solely up to you and what you're comfortable doing. But I find that sometimes describing intent versus impact is powerful to people, because there's a lot of people, like I said earlier, that don't intend for their remarks to be harmful or hurtful, but it doesn't mean that they're not. Okay, I think I've gotten the 2-minute warning on the clock.
Yes.
So your 2 minutes start now.
All right, and we have our last question.
I was interested in what happened after the event on the campus of Miami of Ohio after the sukkah was. I would like to hear what the other students, if any interventions, anything happened.
That is a great question because I'll tell you exactly what happened, and it was incredible. Right, the Hillel director, her name's Whitney Fish, by the way, extraordinary young woman, extraordinary leader. I'm so thankful to get to work with people in this state like Whitney. She contacted me immediately. They drafted a statement that went out immediately on social media platforms. I lifted up that statement with ADL statement. The 3 individuals responsible for the attack walked into the Hillel and confessed. And then the following week, there was a Love and Honor Shabbat on campus. I drove to Miami of Ohio to go speak, and over 200 people showed up to the Hillel for that service. Jews and non-Jews alike showing up together to celebrate Shabbat. It was powerful. It was extraordinary. And that's how communities need to respond to incidents of anti-Semitism and hate. When I say there's more of us than them, that's not just a hyperbole, it's a fact, right? And I've seen it with my own eyes, right? An incident small and large. Okay, I think we'll end on that note. Thank you. Thanks for all being here.
So first of all, let me